Mike Tyson biting Evander Holyfield's ear, Tommy Morrison denying his HIV diagnosis while putting opponents at risk, Riddick Bowe kidnapping his own family. These aren't just random incidents, they're part of a disturbing pattern that's been destroying boxing legends for decades. Some of the sport's biggest heroes didn't just lose their way after retirement, they turned into completely different people. Today I'm breaking down every major boxer who lost their soul after hanging up the gloves. And trust me, these stories are darker than you think. Arturo Gatti, the self-destructive warrior. Arturo Gatti made a career out of turning every fight into a war, but the same mentality that made him a legend in the ring destroyed him outside of it. Gatti's trilogy with Mickey Ward became the stuff of legend, not because of technical brilliance, because both men were willing to absorb incredible punishment to entertain the crowd. Gatti won 2 of those fights. The cost was enormous. After retirement in 2007, the damage caught up fast. Gatti became paranoid and erratic, believing people were out to get him, that his phones were tapped, that he was being followed. The fearless warrior had become a frightened, broken man. His marriage to Amanda Rodriguez was violent and chaotic. Police were called to their home multiple times for domestic disputes. The man beloved by boxing fans was becoming someone his own family feared. But here's where it gets really dark. Gatti seemed to be actively trying to destroy himself. He'd pick fights with strangers, drive recklessly, put himself in dangerous situations for no reason. It was like he was trying to finish what boxing had started. Paranoia consumed him. Gatti started carrying weapons, changing hotels constantly, using different names, refusing to eat food he hadn't prepared himself. In 2009, he was found dead in a Brazilian hotel room under mysterious circumstances. His wife was charged with murder but later released. The official cause was suicide by hanging. The people close to Gatti believe he was murdered. Either way, his transformation from beloved warrior to paranoid recluse was complete. Tommy Morrison, the HIV denier. Tommy Morrison had everything: looks, talent, charisma, and a Hollywood career. Then HIV destroyed his life, and his response was to become a conspiracy theorist who endangered everyone around him. When Morrison tested positive for HIV in 1996, it should have ended his fighting career. Instead, it was the beginning of his transformation into something truly dangerous. Morrison refused to accept his diagnosis. He claimed the tests were wrong, that HIV didn't cause AIDS, that the whole thing was a government conspiracy. This wasn't just denial, this was willful ignorance that put other people's lives at risk. But here's where it gets really dark. Morrison kept fighting. He moved to different states, used fake names, and continued boxing despite knowing he was HIV positive. He was literally risking his opponents' lives every time he stepped into the ring. Conspiracy theories consumed him. He started believing the government was trying to kill him, that pharmaceutical companies were poisoning people, that HIV was a hoax designed to control the population. Morrison's behavior became increasingly erratic. He'd show up to interviews rambling about government cover-ups and medical conspiracies. He started a website promoting dangerous medical misinformation. He told fans to stop taking their HIV medication. The most disturbing part was how he used his fame to spread dangerous lies. People looked up to him, and he used that influence to promote ideas that could literally kill people. Morrison died in 2013, still denying that HIV had anything to do with his illness. Even on his deathbed, he was spreading conspiracy theories and refusing proper medical treatment. Riddick Bowe, the family destroyer. Riddick Bowe beat Evander Holyfield twice and was considered one of the best heavyweights of his generation. Then retirement hit and everything fell apart in the most disturbing way possible. The first sign something was wrong came in 1998 when Bowe joined the Marines. Not unusual for an ex-boxer, right? Except Bowe quit after 11 days, claiming he couldn't handle the training. This is a guy who survived wars in the boxing ring and he couldn't make it through basic training. That was just the beginning. In 1999, Bowe was arrested for kidnapping his own wife and children. He drove them to North Carolina against their will, and when police tried to stop him, he led them on a high-speed chase. The kidnapping incident revealed just how far Bowe had fallen. This wasn't a moment of poor judgment. This was a pattern of controlling and abusive behavior that had been building for years. Bowe's mental state continued to deteriorate. He started making bizarre public statements, showing up to events acting erratically, getting into confrontations with fans and media. A confident, articulate champion had been replaced by someone completely disconnected from reality. The most disturbing aspect was how it affected his family. His wife filed multiple restraining orders against him. His children were afraid to be around him. The man who was supposed to protect them had become the thing they needed protection from. By the way, if you guys want to subscribe, I'm going to start posting every day. Thanks. Anyways, Bowe's story is particularly tragic because unlike some other boxers, he seemed to understand what was happening to him. In interviews, he'd sometimes have moments of clarity where he'd acknowledge something was wrong. But those moments never lasted long enough for him to get the help he needed. Mike Tyson, the Cannibal Unleashed. Mike Tyson didn't just turn evil after retirement. He was already showing signs during his career. Retirement made everything infinitely worse. During his prime, Tyson was already biting ears, threatening to eat children, talking about driving opponents to the edge of madness. But at least he was channeling that rage into something productive. After retirement, all bets were off. The money disappeared first. Tyson made over $300 million during his career and somehow managed to blow through almost all of it. We're talking about a guy who owned Bengal tigers as pets and spent $2 million on bathtubs. In 2003, he filed for bankruptcy despite earning more money than most small countries. The financial ruin was just the beginning. The drug addiction got worse. The violent outbursts became more frequent. He started getting arrested for everything from DUI to assault. But here's the really disturbing part. Tyson seemed to enjoy his reputation as a monster. He leaned into it, started doing interviews where he'd talk about wanting to hurt people, about enjoying violence, about not caring if he lived or died. The most chilling moment came during a 2005 interview where he said, "I'm not Mother Teresa. I'm not Charles Manson either." The fact that he had to clarify he wasn't a serial killer should tell you everything you need to know about where his head was at. Tyson's behavior wasn't just affecting him, it was destroying everyone around him. His relationships fell apart. His children were scared of him. His friends started keeping their distance. The scariest part, Tyson was completely aware of what he was becoming and he didn't care. In fact, he seemed to take pride in being the villain everyone expected him to be. James Tunney, the delusional king. James Tunney's post-retirement behavior wasn't violent or criminal. It was something almost worse. Complete delusion about his legacy and abilities. Tunney was a legitimate great fighter during his prime. He won titles in multiple weight classes and had some of the best defensive skills in boxing history. But retirement revealed a man who couldn't accept that time was over. The illusion started small. Tunney would claim he could still beat current champions despite being years past his prime and significantly overweight. He'd show up to press conferences demanding title shots and acting like promoters were crazy for not taking him seriously. But it got worse. Tunney started rewriting history, claiming victories in fights he clearly lost and exaggerating his accomplishments. He began presenting himself as the greatest fighter who ever lived, despite having a record that, while impressive, didn't support such claims. The most disturbing part was how he treated other fighters. He'd show up at boxing events and start confrontations with active fighters, challenging them to fights and becoming aggressive when they didn't take him seriously. Tunney's delusion extended to his physical condition. Despite being clearly out of shape and past his prime, he continued to believe he was in fighting condition. He'd strip down at press conferences to show off his physique, seemingly unaware of how he actually looked. The tragedy of Tunney's story is that his delusion prevented him from enjoying his legitimate accomplishments. Instead of being remembered as a skilled defensive fighter who had a great career, he became known as a delusional has-been who couldn't accept reality. Gerald McClellan, the Forgotten Warrior. Gerald McClellan's story is different because his transformation wasn't by choice. It was the result of catastrophic brain damage that the boxing world tried to ignore. McClellan was a devastating puncher who seemed destined for greatness. Then came his 1995 fight with Nigel Benn in London, a fight that would destroy his life and expose boxing's darkest side. During the fight, McClellan collapsed and went into a coma. When he woke up, he was blind, deaf, and had severe brain damage. Warrior, who once struck fear into opponents, had been reduced to needing constant care. But here's where the story gets truly dark. The boxing world largely abandoned McClellan while he struggled with basic daily tasks. The sport moved on without him. There were no major fundraising efforts, no ongoing support from the organizations that had profited from his fights. McClellan's family was left to deal with the financial and emotional burden of his care. His sister Liza became his primary caregiver, sacrificing her own life to take care of her brother. The boxing world that had celebrated McClellan's violence was nowhere to be found when dealing with its consequences. The most disturbing aspect is how it revealed boxing's hypocrisy. The sport loves to talk about warrior spirit and courage, but when one of its warriors needed help, the response was silence. McClellan's transformation from feared puncher to helpless invalid should have been a wake-up call for boxing. Instead, it became a cautionary tale that most people in the sport chose to ignore. Mildred Taylor, the 2-second tragedy. Mildred Taylor's downfall was captured on live television for the world to see, and then everyone just forgot about him. Taylor was an Olympic gold medalist and undefeated welterweight champion when he faced Julio Cesar Chavez in 1990. Going into the 12th and final round, Taylor was ahead on all scorecard. He just needed to survive 3 more minutes to win the biggest fight of his career. Then disaster struck. With seconds left in the fight, Chavez landed a devastating right hand that dropped Taylor. Taylor got up, but when referee Richard Steele looked into his eyes and asked if he was okay, Taylor couldn't respond. Steele stopped the fight with 2 seconds left on the clock. That moment didn't just cost Taylor the fight, it destroyed his brain. The punishment he absorbed in that fight, particularly in the final rounds, left him with severe cognitive damage that would affect him for the rest of his life. After that fight, Taylor was never the same. His speech became slurred, his memory started failing, and his personality changed completely. The articulate, confident champion had been replaced by someone who struggled to complete basic sentences. But here's the really disturbing part. Taylor kept fighting. Despite obvious signs of brain damage, he continued his career for several more years. Promoters and managers who should have protected him instead exploited his condition for profit. Taylor's post-retirement life has been a nightmare. He struggled with homelessness, addiction, and severe depression. The man who once stood on top of the boxing world now needs help with basic daily tasks. The most tragic aspect is how the boxing world has treated him since his decline. Despite being one of the most skilled fighters of his generation, he's been largely forgotten. In recent interviews, Taylor struggles to remember basic details about his career. The fights that made him famous are now just fragments in a damaged mind. Iron Barkley, the Blade's violence. Iron the Blade Barkley was one of the most exciting fighters of the 80s and 90s, known for his devastating power and warrior mentality. But retirement revealed a man who'd been living on the edge of violence his entire life. Barkley's career was defined by explosive moments, his knockout of Thomas Hearns, his wars with Roberto Duran, his ability to end fights with a single punch. But that same explosive nature that made him great in the ring made him dangerous outside of it. After retirement, Barkley's violent tendencies didn't disappear. They just found new targets. He was arrested multiple times for assault, domestic violence, and weapons charges. The man who'd been paid to hurt people in the ring was now hurting people for free. Barkley's story gets darker when you look at his background. He grew up in the Bronx during the crack epidemic, surrounded by violence and poverty. Boxing was supposed to be his way out, but instead it just gave him a legal outlet for the rage that had been building his entire life. The most disturbing incident came in 2004 when Barkley was arrested for stabbing a man during a bar fight. The details were horrific. Barkley had gotten into an argument over a pool game and responded by pulling out a knife and attacking the other man. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment thing either. Witnesses said Barkley was calm and methodical during the attack, like he was back in the ring working over an opponent. The man who thrilled boxing fans with his violence had turned the same violence against innocent people. Barkley served time in prison for the stabbing, but it didn't change him. After his release, he continued to get into violent confrontations. The pattern was always the same: minor disagreement, explosive rage, serious violence. The tragedy of Barkley's story is that everyone saw it coming. His violent tendencies were obvious throughout his career. Nobody did anything to help him channel that rage in a healthy way after retirement. Johnny Tapia, the suicidal champion. Johnny Tapia's story might be the most heartbreaking of all because his self-destruction was so public and so preventable. Tapia was a 5-time world champion who fought with the heart of a warrior and the demons of a broken man. His mother was murdered when he was 8 years old, and that trauma followed him throughout his entire life. During his career, Tapia was already showing signs of serious mental health issues. He attempted suicide multiple times, struggled with drug addiction, and had violent outbursts that scared even his closest friends. Retirement made everything worse. Without boxing to focus his rage and pain, Tapia spiraled completely out of control. The drug use escalated to the point where he was using cocaine and heroin daily. Suicide attempts became more frequent, more serious. Tapia's behavior became increasingly erratic and dangerous. Disappear for days at a time, show up to public events high on drugs, and get into violent confrontations with anyone who tried to help him. The most disturbing aspect of Tapia's decline was how he seemed to be trying to kill himself slowly. He would overdose, recover, and then immediately go back to using. It was like he was playing Russian roulette with his own life. In 2012, Tapia was found dead in his home from a drug overdose. He was 45 years old and had been struggling with addiction for over 3 decades. His death was ruled accidental, but everyone who knew him understood it was really a very slow suicide. Tapia's transformation from beloved champion to tragic casualty represents everything wrong with how boxing treats fighters with mental health issues. The sport celebrated his warrior spirit while ignoring the obvious signs that he was dying inside. The most tragic parts that Tapia's story could have had a different ending. Proper mental health support and addiction treatment, he might still be alive today. Instead, it became another cautionary tale that the boxing world chose to ignore. Edwin Valero, the final tragedy. But if you think those stories were dark, wait until you hear about Edwin Valero, a fighter whose post-retirement evil was so extreme it shocked even the boxing world. Valero was an undefeated Venezuelan knockout artist who seemed destined for greatness. All 27 of his professional wins came by knockout, and he was being groomed for a shot at the biggest names in boxing. Then brain damage and domestic violence turned him into a monster. The warning signs were there throughout his career. Valero had suffered a serious motorcycle accident that required brain surgery. His behavior became increasingly erratic afterward. He would have violent outbursts, threaten opponents and their families, and show signs of severe paranoia. But the boxing world ignored these red flags because Valero was making money. Promoters and managers saw his knockout power and marketability, and they chose to overlook the obvious signs that something was seriously wrong with his mental state. After retirement, Valero's behavior escalated to horrifying levels. He became obsessed with controlling his wife Jennifer, monitoring her every move, and becoming violently jealous of any interaction she had with other people. The domestic violence got worse and worse. Valero would beat his wife regularly, threaten to kill her and isolate her from friends and family. The man who'd been celebrated for his violence in the ring was now using that same violence against the person who loved him most. In April 2010, the situation reached its tragic conclusion. Valero murdered his wife Jennifer in their hotel room, stabbing her multiple times in a fit of rage. When police arrived to arrest him, they found Jennifer's body and Valero covered in blood. But the story gets even darker. The next day, while in police custody, Valero hanged himself in his jail cell. He left behind a note saying he couldn't live with what he'd done, but by then it was too late for remorse. Valero's murder-suicide sent shockwaves through the boxing world, but their response was predictably inadequate. Instead of examining how the sport failed him and his wife, most people just wrote it off as an isolated incident. The truth is, Valero's transformation from undefeated prospect to wife killer was entirely preventable. Brain damage, the violent behavior, the obvious mental health issues, all of these were warning signs that the boxing world chose to ignore. Jennifer Valero paid the ultimate price for boxing's negligence. She died because the sport that her husband served refused to acknowledge that he needed help.